Continuing my skew chisel series, in this video we're going to be looking at cutting pommels. Pommels are the square section that you find at the top of table legs and stair spindles, and creating that transition from square to round can be a challenge, so that's what we're going to look at here. When I'm cutting pommels, I would generally use my signature beading and parting tool, but if you wanted to use a more conventional skew, this is my modified 7-degree skew, I would use the long point for this. And the techniques are really the same as what we've been doing in the previous video looking at slicing cuts. All of these cuts are going to be slicing cuts. The thing that makes it slightly different is that we're going to be cutting into square section timber rather than into a cylinder. So when I'm doing this, I will mark a single face. If I'm going to make a set of legs, for example, I'll lay all the legs out together on the bench and I'll just put a single line across all of the legs. So you can see it's only on one face. But when that's spinning, I can generally see that very clearly, especially on light wood. Maybe if it was very dark wood, or maybe if it was very big, you might need it on more than one face. But later I'm going to be turning a large 5-inch oak leg, and you'll see that I just do a single line on that as well, and I can see that perfectly well. So a single line is absolutely fine. And the initial focus here is to maintain the square corners of the part that's staying square. And in this case, this side's going to stay square and this side is going to get turned down into a cylinder. So my initial cut is always going to be towards the waist. So let's fire up the lathe and I'll show you how that goes. So I've centered it fairly carefully so it's running nicely, and you can see the line is here. So my first cut is going to be there. So that is going into the waist. And what you'll see straight away, you'll notice that there's bits been chipped up and broken off, but they're on the waist side. And the side that I'm trying to preserve are nice and clean. So that is a good sign. Now what I've got to do is repeat that, and just repeat it several times, working back toward the line. And initially what I'm going to try and do is produce a square shoulder. So let's do that. And this cut, just like with the slicing cut, we're not just poking and jabbing into the wood. It's that cut where I'm going to lift the handle and slice the tip forwards in an arcing motion. So I'm slicing into the wood. And you can see that as I'm getting back towards the line, I'm gradually bringing my handle round so that my bevel is in line with the cut, just like we did when I was doing the slicing cuts. So I'm going to finish off somewhere here, but each cut that you do essentially is a practice for the final cut. Stop the lathe and have a little look at that. But what you should be able to see here, if this has gone well, we've got a nice clean square edge that's broken the edge all the way through, and my waist area looks a bit untidy, but that's not really a problem. And this area here, that's kind of like a kind of valley area, if you like, it means that if I was to get some sort of catch over here on the turn side, those catches are going to sort of stop here. It acts like a kind of safety brake, if you like, but it means we've got a nice square shoulder. Let me turn that away and then I'll show you a few other shapes that we can do on this square shoulder. I'll always start out by cutting my shoulders square like that, and then from there I can always develop them into whatever shapes required for the job in hand. There was a time when square shoulders were quite common, maybe Victorian, Edwardian sort of period, but you won't see it quite so often these days on modern turnings, certainly mass-produced turnings, because copy lathes can't deal with square shoulders. So the shape you'll see on more modern turnings has a slight curve on here, so we're going to put that in next. Usually only about 10 mil, something like that, somewhere here. So if I put a secondary line in just there like that, what we're going to do is create a slight curve from the top down to the bottom. So where to get the square shoulder, I adjusted myself so that my bevel was in line and I was slicing and pushing forwards. With this one, just like in the slicing video from a couple of weeks ago, we're going to start with the edge at a slight angle like that, and as I lift and slice, there's going to be a roll and a swing of the handle. So let's have a go at that. We're creating a very slight dome is what we're aiming for here. Again, I wouldn't do it in one. 2 or 3 cuts on this is going to give you a far better result than one big heavy cut. So 1, 2, 3. Stop that and have a little look. So what we should have here is a slight curve. There we go. So this is the sort of thing you'll see on modern mass-produced turnings. This slight curve is very common. Copy lathes can deal with that. But square shoulders, they can't. And the other shape that you'll see on genuine old sort of antique turnings, stair spindles, table legs, that sort of thing, this curve actually comes much further back. So it comes back to kind of here somewhere. So it's a little bit more like turning a bead rather than just turning a slight dome. So if we come back to somewhere here and do that again, in this case, just like in the previous video, I'm going to start with the tool a little bit more horizontal. So there's a little bit more of a rolling action with the tool handle swinging around. So we're almost turning a bead. The fact that this is square and there's a lot of air being moved and being turned, if you can turn air, then it doesn't, just ignore that. Pretend it's round. It's really just the same. When it's turning, essentially it's round, even though we know it's not. So you can just about see the line. We're going to come back to here. We're going to start with the tool a lot more horizontal, maybe not completely horizontal. And I've just put my hand slightly underneath the tool to allow me to have that rolling action. One more. Tidy up in there. Have a little look at that as well. So this is a more pronounced curve. Again, you won't really see this on modern mass-produced turnings, but on genuine antiques, you find that a lot more, either square or this more pronounced curve a lot more. But you can see that the technique for doing it is really just the same as the technique that we used in the slicing video. Another shape you will see from time to time on genuinely old turnings is a kind of ogee shape. Sometimes in the joinery trade, it's referred to as a lamb's tongue. And that is done with a spindle gouge. So in this video, this part of the video, we're going to slightly move away from the skew, just briefly. And in this one, we're going to create this kind of S shape. So we start by creating a hollow shape with the gouge. And then once we've got the beginnings of a kind of cove shape, I'm then going to flow round into a sort of bead. So it flows in a kind of S shape. So we'll have a go at that. In a couple of weeks' time, I will be doing some videos using a spindle gouge. So we'll look in more detail at cutting coves and things like that then. But for now, just this little detail, we're going to create this kind of scoop. And occasionally you will see this detail. You will just see that. That is sometimes a detail that you'll see, you know, on its own as part of the design. But occasionally you'll also see it developed into this ogee or lamb's tongue shape. So once we've got that curve, we can start bringing it around there and around. So it's a bit more of a complex shape to make. There's a lot of movement involved. There, down into that corner. Probably go down into a bit more of a cove here, a little bit deeper with this part of the detail. And there we go, that's your ogee or lamb's tongue design on your pommels. The other occasion where I'll use a spindle gouge rather than a skew is for large diameter work. These are some 5-inch oak legs that I'm just working on, and I need a dead square pommel here. So I've tried both methods, but I find that a spindle gouge, and this is only a 3/8, so 10mm spindle gouge, that will give me a better, cleaner result with less chatter and vibration. I don't know exactly why, but I suspect it's because the bevel's curved, so there's actually less bevel contact, so less chance for it to vibrate and chatter. And, you know, I'm not that obsessed with the skew chisel that I won't use a different tool if I can get a better result. So in this instance, I will use a spindle gouge. So let's fire up the lathe and I'll show you how I go about cutting this. So although I'm using a spindle gouge rather than a skew, the actual method, the technique is just the same. So I'm going to be using my bevel pointing in the direction of travel, and I'm going to be using that same lifting and slicing technique. Again, I'm going to start on the waste side or the turn side of the line, and we're going to cut in. On such a large diameter, you do get bigger chunks coming out of the wood, but you can release those. So this is one of the few times where I actually swap hands. Generally speaking, I'm left-handed when I'm spindle turning, but for this occasion where I want to get a very straight cut and to sight down the bevel, doing this right-handed actually makes more sense. It's kind of a right-handed cut. I guess I could flip the wood in the lathe, but I prefer to turn the legs in this way around, so this is how I do it. So I swap hands. Again, I've got my bevel pointing in line, and I'm going to slice. And I just keep repeating that just like before, only obviously when it's bigger and when it's oak rather than pine, there's more resistance to the cut. So it takes more cuts to get back to the line. You have to take more smaller cuts when you're using a more dense material. And that should be the shoulder cut nice and square. Let's have a little look at that. Yeah, so we've got a nice clean straight line. We've broken through all the way, and so now I can go on, turn that down and turn the design into the leg. But that is the square shoulder, and I use a spindle gouge when I'm doing that. I hope you found this video helpful and interesting, and I'll see you next time for another Skew Chisel video.